In the lightless vaults of the primordial world, before the sun ever rose to challenge the dark, a spirit of fire was twisted into a shape of absolute terror. He was not a mindless beast, but a high captain of the first Dark Lord, a being of such immense power and malice that the very mention of his name caused the greatest kings of the elves to tremble. He was the slayer of the mightiest, the breaker of cities, and the iron fist of Angband. Welcome to Echoes of Middle-earth. Today, we are descending into the smoke and shadow of the First Age to chronicle the terrifying reign of Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs. We will explore his origins as a corrupted Maya, his role as the premier general of Morgoth's armies, and the blood-soaked duels that claimed the lives of the High Kings of the Noldor. To understand Gothmog, one must first understand the nature of his kind. Long ago, in the beginning of Arda, Melkor, the Vala who would become Morgoth, was the mightiest of the Ainur. But he spent his spirit in envy and hate, and he drew many of the Maiar into his shadow. Among these spirits were the Valaraukar, the scourges of fire that in Middle-earth were called the Balrogs. Gothmog was the greatest of these demons, a spirit whose heart was of fire, but who was cloaked in a dense, suffocating darkness. Unlike the orcs, who were bred in mockery of the elves, Gothmog was a primordial being of the same order as Sauron and the wizards, possessing a spiritual stature that few in history could rival.
The early history of Gothmog is a tale of loyalty to the Shadow. During the siege of Utumno, when the Valar first made war upon Melkor to protect the newly awakened elves, Gothmog and his fellow Balrogs did not perish. They lurked in the deepest forgotten vaults of Angband, in pits to which the Valar in the haste of their assault had not descended. There they waited in a darkness of desire for the return of their master. That return came after the darkening of Valinor, when Morgoth fled the Blessed Realm with the stolen Silmarils. As Morgoth reached the waste of Lamoth and the northwest of Middle-earth, he was ensnared by the great spider Ungoliant, who sought to devour the jewels. Morgoth, in his agony and fear, sent forth a terrible cry that echoed through the mountains. Deep in the ruined halls of Angband, the Balrogs heard him. Led by Gothmog, they arose swiftly and passed over Hithlum as a tempest of fire. With their whips of flame, they smote the webs of Ungoliant and rescued the Dark Lord, escorting him back to the safety of his northern fastness. It was from this moment that Gothmog was established as the High Captain of Angband, the military right hand of Morgoth.
The first great casualty of Gothmog's career was none other than Feanor, the mightiest and most proud of all the Eldar. After the Noldor returned to Middle-earth in pursuit of Morgoth, they achieved a sudden victory in the battle under stars, the Dagor Nuin Gileath. Feanor, consumed by a spirit of fire and a reckless pride, pursued the fleeing orcs toward the very gates of Angband. He outstripped his own vanguard, and in the gloom before the doors of the Dark Lord, he was ambushed. Out of the gates of Angband, Gothmog and his Balrogs issued forth. Feanor stood alone against them for a long time, undaunted, though he was wrapped in fire and wounded with many hurts. But at last, the Lord of Balrog smote him to the earth. Though Feanor's sons arrived in time to drive the demons back and bear their father away, the damage was done. The spirit of Feanor was so great that when he died, his body was consumed to ash. Gothmog had claimed the life of the King of the Noldor, setting a precedent for the tragedies to come. As the First Age progressed, Gothmog remained the most active and feared commander in the north. While Sauron, known as Gorthaur the Cruel, was a master of phantoms, sorcery, and deceits of cunning, Gothmog represented the raw physical terror of Morgoth's will. He was a general of strong and terrible force who coordinated the movements of the orc hosts in the Dragons. During the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, Gothmog led the assault that broke the long siege of Angband, turning the grassy plain of Ard Galan into a desert of gasping dust. However, his most infamous deed occurred during the Nearnath Arnodiad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. In this catastrophic conflict, the elves and the Edain made a final desperate attempt to overthrow the Dark Lord. For a moment, it seemed they might prevail, as the host of Fingon, the High King of the Noldor, reached the very steps of Angband. But Morgoth unleashed his final strength, and the tide turned through treachery and the sheer weight of his monsters and fell creatures.
In the final hours of the battle, Fingon was forced into a rearguard action against a sea of foes. Gothmog himself rode forth to meet him. This was a duel between the highest of the elves and the most powerful of the demons. Fingon's swordplay was legendary, and he fought with a valor that recalled the glory of the Elder Days. But Gothmog was not alone. A second Balrog cast a thong of fire about Fingon, and while the king was thus entangled, Gothmog smote him with his great black axe. The High King fell, and his white and silver banner was trodden into the mire of his blood. Once again, Gothmog had decapitated the leadership of the Noldor. The terror of Gothmog reached its absolute zenith during the fall of Gondolin, the Hidden Rock. For centuries, the city of King Turgon had remained a sanctuary, hidden from the eyes of Morgoth by the encircling mountains. But through the treachery of Meglin, the secret was revealed, and Morgoth sent a host of dragons and Balrogs to level the city.
In the riven fragments of the city's defense, the most poignant struggle occurred at the Square of the King. There, Ecthelion of the Fountain, the Warden of the Great Gate, stood as the last barrier against the shadow. Gothmog, seeking to complete the destruction of the House of Fingolfin, engaged Ecthelion in a final titanic struggle. The sources tell us that in the midst of the carnage, Ecthelion and Gothmog slew each other. Ecthelion, though his sword arm was spent, threw himself upon the demon lord, and they both fell into the deep fountains of the city. The waters that were once Gondolin's pride became the tomb of its greatest enemy, as the cold springs of the king's house extinguished the primordial fire of the Lord of Balrogs. The death of Gothmog was a turning point in the spiritual history of Arda. While other Balrogs remained, including the one that would later be known as Durin's Bane in the mines of Moria, the loss of their lord signaled the beginning of the end for Morgoth's military organization. Gothmog had been more than a warrior. He was a focal point of dreadful power, a captain whose very presence made the shadow of his master feel immeasurably strong. Even in the Third Age, the memory of Gothmog and his kind remained a legend of vague fear among the elves and the wise. When the Fellowship of the Ring encountered the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, Legolas cried out in grief and amazement, for he recognized the demon as a relic of the ancient world. To the elves, who remembered the weeping of women and the fall of kings in the Elder Days, a Balrog was a nightmare that should have stayed buried in the ruin of the First Age. Gothmog's legacy is written in the tears unnumbered shed by the people of the Noldor. He was the instrument of the prophecy of the North, the vengeance that pursued the elves across the sea. He showed that even the most radiant spirit of fire could be extinguished by a deeper, darker flame when pride and the curse of a Dark Lord dictated the path. He remains the ultimate example of a servant of the enemy who rose to a standing of high command, not through administration or guile, but through the perfection of terror. As we look upon the history of Beleriand, we see the shadow of Gothmog's whip stretching across every major tragedy. From the doors of Angband to the fountains of Gondolin, his fire was the scourge that drove the elves into their long exile and wane. He was the high captain of a power that suffered no rival, and though he perished in the ruin he created, the echoes of his mace and the crack of his whip can still be heard in the deepest dales of memory. Thank you for joining us for this investigation into the High Captain of Angband here on Echoes of Middle-earth. If you found this journey into the dark heart of the First Age compelling, make sure to like and subscribe as we continue to unearth the hidden lore and terrifying legends of Arda. Until the stars of the Valasirka shine again on our meeting, may your path be free of the black breath and your heart stay as resolute as the heroes who held the line against the shadow.